I deleted my father's number on our wedding day. Not in some dramatic gesture during the ceremony, I'm not that theatrical, but at 11:42 p.m., sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed still wearing my reception dress, while my new husband showered off the remnants of our first dance. 3 seconds of holding down his contact entry, 1 confident tap on delete contact, and 15 years of desperately seeking approval vanished from my phone, if not my psyche. It was the easiest hard thing I've ever done. Before the story continues, write in the comments if your parents loved you. I'd love to read it. The empty chair at table 7 that afternoon had spoken volumes. Dad had made his choice with 5 brutal words 6 months earlier. If you love him, don't call. So I didn't. Not when we set the date. Not when I found the dress. Not when I walked down the aisle with my arm linked through my beaming stepfather's, instead of his. The thing about ultimatums is that they're essentially suicide missions in relationship form. Dad expected me to fold like I always had, to choose his comfortable fiction over my complicated truth. He never imagined I'd actually take him at his word. But love isn't love if it requires you to amputate your own happiness to qualify. So, here I was, Olivia Kelly, née Hudson, 12 hours into a marriage my father had prophesied would destroy me, feeling more whole than I had in 27 years. When Elijah emerged from the bathroom, steam following him like a personal weather system, I held up my phone with its newly abbreviated contact list and said, "I just deleted my father." He paused, towel around his waist, another rubbing his hair that somehow always looked perfect, whether professionally styled for magazine covers or dripping onto hotel carpet. "You sure about that?" he asked, not challenging but confirming the distinction that had first made me fall for him. "Absolutely," I replied. "He made his choice. I've made mine." Elijah sat beside me, pressing his damp shoulder against my silk-covered one. "For what it's worth, he's the one missing out. Not just on you, though that's his biggest loss, but on knowing what's actually real instead of what he thinks should be." I leaned against him. This man whose existence had forced me to finally, irrevocably choose between my father's conditional love and my own authentic life. "I know," I said. "And honestly, it hurts less than I expected." That was the first night of our marriage, and I'd like to say it was the last time I thought about my father's absence. That would make for a neater story. Girl chooses love, girl never looks back, roll credits on the patriarchal drama. But real life isn't nearly so tidy, and healing isn't a straight line. It's more like repeatedly tripping over the same route in a dark forest until you finally learn to step over it or go around. What I can say is this: I never regretted deleting his number. Not when our first anniversary came and went. Not when I discovered I was pregnant 18 months later. Not even when I glimpsed him across a crowded airport 3 years after our wedding, and instinctively ducked behind a newsstand, rather than face whatever version of himself he'd become. But let me back up. You need to understand what led to that. Empty chair, that deleted contact, that irrevocable choice between pleasing my father and living my truth. I was 19 when I first met Elijah Carter. Not the 25-year-old law student who would eventually become my husband, but the rising rap artist whose debut album, Concrete Dreams, had just gone platinum. I was a sophomore journalism major, landing my first real interview for the college newspaper, sweating through my carefully selected professional but cool outfit in the green room of our university's Performing Arts Center. "You're up," the tour manager said, barely glancing at my press pass before ushering me into a room where Elijah sat scrolling through his phone, looking simultaneously younger and older than his 22 years. "Mr. Carter," I started, voice embarrassingly. "Hi, I'm Olivia Hudson from the Daily." "Man, please don't call me Mr. Carter," he interrupted, looking up with a grin that was nowhere near as arrogant as I'd expected. "Makes me feel like I should be wearing suspenders or something." And just like that, my nervousness dissolved into laughter. The interview flowed easily after that, Elijah thoughtful and articulate about everything from his creative process to the political undertones in tracks that most critics dismissed as party anthems. I was supposed to have 15 minutes. We talked for 45 until his manager physically intervened. "You ask good questions," he said as I gathered my notes. "Most people just want to know about the fame shit. I'm more interested in the person behind the persona," I replied, suddenly bold. "The work speaks for itself." He studied me for a beat too long. "You got Instagram or something, in case I think of anything else for your article?" I gave him my handle, assuming it was a polite dismissal. When he DM'd me 3 hours later, I nearly dropped my phone in the shower. For 2 months, we existed in a strange liminal space. Not quite friends, definitely not dating, but messaging daily about everything from books to politics to the merits of different breakfast cereals. He was on tour. I was drowning in midterms. The distance made it safe to be unusually honest. When his tour brought him back through Chicago, he invited me to dinner. Not backstage, not to a club, but to an actual restaurant with tablecloths and a wine list I pretended to understand. Walking in beside him felt like stepping into someone else's life, especially when whispers followed us to our table. "You know people are staring, right?" I said after we ordered. "Yeah," he shrugged. "You get used to it. Or you don't, and you go crazy." "Which camp are you in?" "Still deciding." His smile was different in person, quicker, with a dimple his airbrushed press photos didn't capture. "But it helps to be with someone who sees past all that." "Is that what I'm doing?" "Isn't it?" He tilted his head. "You've never once asked me about celebrities I know or parties I've been to. It's refreshing. I hadn't asked because I'd been too intimidated, but I accepted the unearned credit for depth." "Well, your thoughts on Toni Morrison's prose style are more interesting than who you saw at the VMAs. See, that right there." He pointed his fork at me. "That's why I like talking to you." 3 dinners, 6 movie nights, and countless messages later, I realized with a start that I was dating Elijah Carter. Not intentionally, not officially, but effectively. We hadn't kissed, hadn't done more than hug goodbye, but there was an unmistakable gravity between us, pulling us into each other's orbits despite the improbability of our connection. "You should come to New York," he said one night over FaceTime. "Meet some friends, see where I work." "I have finals," I hedged, though they were weeks away. "After that, then." He paused. "Unless you don't want to, which is cool too." The vulnerability in his voice undid me. This man who performed for thousands, who'd grown up hard in Southside Chicago before music changed his trajectory, who could literally have his pick of people to spend time with, he was nervous about my answer. "I want to," I said. "I'm just..." "What?" I sighed. "Scared, I guess. This feels like a step into your real world, not just dinner in Chicago when you're passing through." "Isn't that good?" "I like you, Olivia. I want you in my real world. So simple, so direct. No games, no pretense. Just honest desire for my presence." "Okay," I said. After finals, New York. What I didn't say, what I couldn't articulate even to myself yet, was that I was equally afraid of my own world's reaction to him. Specifically my father's. Growing up in Naperville, Illinois, I'd been raised in the particular bubble of upper-middle-class whiteness that views itself as progressive while maintaining strict, unspoken boundaries. My father, Richard Hudson, was a successful orthodontist with a golf club membership and carefully cultivated friendships with the handful of black professionals in our social circle, evidence he would point to whenever he wanted to establish his liberal credentials. "I'm not some conservative dinosaur," he'd say whenever politics came up. "Jerry and I were just discussing this on the back nine yesterday," Jerry being his black colleague from the hospital board, carefully name-checked to establish my father's enlightened worldview. But there was a vast difference between having drinks with Dr. Jerry Williams at the club and the prospect of his daughter dating a black man. especially one from that neighborhood, who made that kind of music. I knew this without having to ask, from a lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle comments, from the way he'd clench his jaw when certain couples walked. Past us, from his nervous laughter at racist jokes he claimed to disapprove of but never actively challenged. My mother might have been a moderating influence, but she died when I was 11, leaving my father to raise me with his particular blend of overprotectiveness and rigid expectations. I'd spent my adolescence trying to fill the gap she'd left, becoming the perfect daughter to compensate for his loss. Straight A's, student council, sensible college choice, I'd built my identity around making his life easier, less lonely. The thought of disappointing him was physically painful. So I said nothing about Elijah as my New York trip approached. Not his name, not his career, and certainly not the way my heart raced whenever his name appeared on my phone. "What are you doing in New York again?" Dad asked as I packed. "Visiting. A friend from school," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Career networking thing." He nodded approvingly. Smart. Connections matter in journalism. If only he knew what connections I was actually pursuing. New York was a revelation. Not just the city, which overwhelmed my Midwestern senses with its pace and density, but Elijah in his element. He was different here. More confident, yes, but also more relaxed, as if being recognized on every street corner somehow freed him rather than constrained him. His apartment shocked me, not the luxury, which I'd expected, but the books. Walls of them, carefully organized, many dog-eared and annotated. Art that wasn't the generic wealth signifiers I'd anticipated, but thoughtfully curated pieces from emerging artists. A piano where he composed when beats and samples felt too limiting. "What?" he asked, catching me staring at his bookshelves. "Nothing," I said. "Just realizing how many assumptions I made about you. Good or bad. Just assumptions. I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Everyone does it. Part of why I brought you here. Wanted you to see me, not the idea of me." That night, at dinner with his friends, a director, a political organizer, a pediatrician, and a fellow musician, I felt simultaneously out of my depth and strangely at home. They argued passionately about prison reform, debated books I'd only pretended to read in class, switched between cultural references I recognized and others that flew past me. But no one made me feel small for what I didn't know, only curious about what I thought. "Your girl's smart," I overheard the director tell Elijah while I was returning from the bathroom. "And she actually listens instead of just waiting to talk." "She's not my girl," Elijah corrected, though his tone suggested he wished otherwise. "Yet," the friend replied with a knowing smirk. He was right. That night, walking back to Elijah's apartment along rain-slicked streets, our hands brushed once, twice, and then deliberately intertwined. Neither of us acknowledged it verbally, but when we reached his building, he turned to me with a question in his eyes. "Yes," I said, answering before he could ask. His kiss was nothing like I'd imagined during embarrassingly frequent daydreams. It was better. Gentler at first, then deeper, his hands cradling my face like something precious, while rain dripped from his eyelashes onto my cheeks. "Been wanting to do that since you walked into that green room," he murmured against my lips. "You have not." I laughed. "Have too. Just didn't want to be that cliché. Rapper hitting on the college journalist. Would have made for a better story than my actual article," I teased. He kissed me again, and I stopped thinking about stories or articles or anything except the feeling of finally finding a missing piece I hadn't known was absent. For 3 days, we existed in a New York bubble where real life couldn't touch us. We wandered museums, ate at hole-in-the-wall restaurants he swore by, spent one entire rainy afternoon reading on his couch with my legs draped over his lap. When he had a studio session, I watched in awe as he transformed from the thoughtful, sometimes shy man I was falling for into the commanding artist whose voice had resonated with millions. On my last night, after we'd finally given in to the desire that had been building since my arrival, I lay in his arms wondering how I could possibly return to my normal life knowing this parallel universe existed. "What are you thinking?" he asked, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "That I don't want to go back tomorrow." He tightened his arm around me. "So don't. Stay another day." "I have class on Monday. Skip it. One class won't kill your GPA." I laughed softly. "That's how it starts. First you're skipping class. Next, thing you know, you're a college dropout following your rapper boyfriend around the country." The word boyfriend hung between us, unauthorized but accurate. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said seriously. "I want my degree. I want my career." "I respect that." He kissed my forehead. "And for what it's worth, I like that about you, that you have your own path. But I also like you. A lot. And I travel constantly, and you're in Chicago, and I don't do casual very well." I propped myself up to look at him properly. "Are you trying to have the 'what are we' conversation?" He grinned, not at all embarrassed. "Guess I am. Subtle, right?" "Very smooth. Top-tier game." "So?" His smile faded slightly, vulnerability showing through. "What are we, Olivia?" I took a deep breath. "I think we're two people who make no sense on paper, but perfect sense in reality. And I think I want to keep figuring out what that means, even with the distance." "Me too," he said simply. "So we're doing this?" "We're doing this," I confirmed, sealing the decision with a kiss that turned into much more. The next morning at the airport, he held me longer than strictly necessary before I went through security. "Call me when you land." "I will." "And Olivia? I know I'm not exactly what parents dream of when they picture their daughter's boyfriend. If that becomes an issue..." I silenced him with a kiss, publicly conspicuous in a way I'd normally avoid. "It won't," I lied. But as my plane took off, anxiety replaced the glow of the weekend. I'd have to tell my father eventually. The thought made my stomach clench with a dread disproportionate to the situation, revealing more about our relationship than I wanted to acknowledge. For 3 months, I lived a double life. In Chicago, I was Richard Hudson's dutiful daughter, focused on school and the carefully prescribed future he'd always envisioned for me. In the spaces between weekends in New York or LA, late-night phone calls, text messages hidden behind a secondary app, I was Elijah's girlfriend, discovering parts of myself I hadn't known existed. He never pushed me about telling my father, never made me feel guilty for maintaining the separation between my worlds. But as our relationship deepened, the compartmentalization became increasingly difficult to maintain. "You coming home for Memorial Day weekend?" Dad asked during our weekly call. "Thought we could go up to the lake house, just the two of us." Chakawon, Lake House, our family sanctuary in Wisconsin where we'd processed my mother's death, where I'd learned to swim and sail, where some of my few uncomplicated memories with my father resided. "I can't," I said, hating myself for the lie to come. "Study group for finals." The silence on the line lasted a beat too long. "Finals are in 3 weeks, Liv." "Advanced prep," I said weakly. "This professor is notorious." Another pause. "You've been unavailable a lot lately." "I'm just busy, Dad. Junior year is intense." "Too busy for family? That's not like you." The implied criticism stung as it was meant to. "Not like you." 4 syllables that had always been enough to bring me back in line. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Maybe July 4th instead? I'll have the whole summer free then." "All right," he conceded, though his tone remained skeptical. "But I expect a full weekend, Olivia. No disappearing to meet friends or work on assignments." "Promise," I agreed, ignoring the fact that Elijah would be performing at Essence Festival that weekend. That was a problem for future me. The call ended with our usual exchange of love yous, his confident, mine tinged with guilt. What I didn't say was that Memorial Day weekend, Elijah was bringing me to his mother's birthday celebration in Chicago, less than 30 miles from where my father thought I was studying. The proximity made the deception even more egregious. Elijah's family lived in a recently gentrified neighborhood that still maintained much of its original character, despite the encroaching boutique coffee shops and yoga studios. His mother had refused to move despite her son's success, preferring to renovate the home where she'd raised 3 children as a single mother after their father was incarcerated. "She's excited to meet you," Elijah said as we approached the 2-story brick house. "Like, embarrassingly excited. Fair warning." "Should I be nervous?" I asked, smoothing the sundress I'd changed outfits 7 times to select. "Nah, she already likes you because I like you. Just be yourself." Easier said than done when myself had become such a fractured concept. Vanessa Carter was a force of nature packed into a 5'4" frame, sharp-eyed, quick to laugh, with the same dimple as her son. She embraced me without hesitation. "Finally," she said, holding me at arm's length to inspect me. "I was starting to think he'd made you up." "Ma," Elijah groaned. "What? You talk about this girl for months but don't bring her around? What's a mother supposed to think?" I blushed at the revelation that he'd been talking about me to his family while I'd been hiding his existence from mine. The house was soon full of extended family, Elijah's siblings with their partners and children, cousins, aunts, neighborhood friends who were family in all but blood. I was passed from conversation to conversation, included in inside jokes, pulled into debates, handed babies to hold. They were warm, yes, but also curious, this white girl from the suburbs who had somehow caught Elijah's attention. I felt the assessment beneath the welcome, the unspoken questions about my intentions, my politics, my understanding of the world their boy moved through. It wasn't hostile, but it was thorough. "So your folks couldn't make it today?" Vanessa asked casually as we prepped food in the kitchen. I nearly dropped the bowl I was holding. Oh no. They don't... I took a breath. "My mom passed when I was 11. It's just my dad, and he doesn't know about Elijah yet." Vanessa's hand stilled on the chicken she was seasoning. "Doesn't know? You've been dating my son for months." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "It's complicated." The single syllable contained volumes. And what's complicated about it exactly? The directness of her gaze made evasion impossible. "My father he has certain expectations, and Elijah doesn't fit them." "Because he's black," she stated flatly. "Or because he's a rapper? Or both?" "Both," I admitted, shame burning my cheeks. "Which is ridiculous and narrow-minded and says everything about my father and nothing about Elijah, but you're afraid to stand up to him," she finished. "Yes." Vanessa wiped her hands on a towel, considering me with an expression I couldn't read. "Let me tell you something, Olivia. Every choice has a cost. Right now, you're choosing my son, but you're making him pay the cost of being your secret. That might work for now, while everything's new and exciting. But secrets get heavy over time." "I know," I whispered. "Do you love him?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because we hadn't said those words to each other yet. "I think I do." "Then you'll need to decide what matters more, your father's approval or your own happiness. Can't always have both." Before I could respond, Elijah's nephew crashed into the kitchen, demanding attention. And the moment passed. But Vanessa's words stayed with me throughout the celebration. Through the cake and presents, Through Elijah's impromptu performance on the piano his mother had sacrificed to provide during his childhood. Through the easy affection of a family that embraced, rather than restricted. Later that night, in the hotel room we'd booked to avoid questions about my study group cover story, I found myself unusually quiet. "You okay?" Elijah asked, pulling me against his chest as we lay in the dark. "Was it too much? My family can be intense. They're wonderful," I said honestly. "That's not it." "Then what?" I traced patterns on his arm, gathering courage. "Your mom asked why my father doesn't know about us." He tensed slightly. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I'm afraid of his reaction because you're not what he pictured for me." Elijah was silent for a long moment. "And what did she say?" "That I'm making you pay the cost of being my secret." "And she's right." He sighed. "Look, I get it's complicated. I told you from the beginning I understand family dynamics. But you shouldn't have to understand," I interrupted, sitting up to face him. "You shouldn't have to be hidden like some shameful secret when you're the best thing in my life." The vulnerability that flashed across his face nearly undid me. "I love you," I blurted, the words finally finding their voice. "And I'm done compartmentalizing. When I go home for July 4th, I'm telling my father about us. All of it." Elijah studied me in the dim light filtering through the hotel curtains. "You sure? Because I don't want you doing this out of guilt or obligation." "I'm sure. I'm doing it because I want to live one life, not two. And because I love you," I repeated, the words easier the second time. He pulled me back down beside him. "I love you too. Have for a while now." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Probably since you argued with me about Kendrick's verse on that track and wouldn't back down even though I literally produced it." I laughed at the memory. "I was right, though. You were. That's what scared me." We made love with a new intensity that night. A seal on promises made. A bridge between my fractured worlds finally under construction. Just didn't anticipate how completely that bridge would collapse when the weight of reality finally tested it. July 4th weekend arrived with the particular sticky heat only a Midwest summer can produce. I'd been a wreck for days, rehearsing different versions of my confession, imagining best and worst case scenarios. Elijah had offered to come with me, but I'd declined. This was a conversation my father and I needed to have alone. The lake house looked exactly as it always did. Weathered, gray cedar shingles, blue shutters my mother had insisted on, wraparound porch lined with Adirondack chairs. Dad was waiting on that porch when I pulled up, beer in hand, looking like a J. Crew catalog version of fatherhood. "There's my girl," he called, descending the steps to hug me. "Thought you'd never get here. Traffic?" "Yeah," I lied. In truth, I'd pulled over twice on the drive up, nearly turning back each time. The first day passed in familiar routine. Swimming off the dock, grilling burgers, watching fireworks from the boat. I kept waiting for the perfect moment to broach the subject, but each opportunity slipped away, lost to cowardice and the comfort of pretending everything was normal. It wasn't until the following afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the lake, that I finally found my courage. "Dad, I need to tell you something." He lowered his book, giving me his full attention, one of his better qualities as a father. "Sounds serious." "It is, or at least it's important." I took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone. For about 8 months now." His eyebrows rose in surprise, then settled into pleased interest. 8 months? That's practically a commitment ceremony in young people terms. Why the secrecy? "Because I was afraid of how you'd react." The interest gave way to confusion. "Why would I react badly to you dating? You're 21, not 16. Here it was, the moment of truth. His name is Elijah Carter. He's a musician, a rapper, actually. I hesitated only briefly. He's black, Dad. I watched as various emotions crossed my father's face. Surprise, confusion, something darker that made my stomach clench, then a forced neutrality that was somehow worse. I see, he said finally. And this is serious? I love him, I said, simply. And he loves me. My father set his book aside, straightening in his chair. Love is a big word at your age, Olivia. I know what I feel. You're still in college. Your frontal lobe isn't even fully developed yet. Really? You're going. With brain development to invalidate my relationship? He sighed heavily. I'm just saying that at 21, everything feels permanent. First serious relationships especially. But part of growing up is realizing that what seems right in the moment might not be right for your future. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning that you're a smart, educated young woman with prospects. You should keep your options open. Experience more before settling on someone so... He trailed off. So what, Dad? Different? Is that what you're trying to say? Don't put words in my mouth, Olivia. I'm concerned about compatibility, shared values, common ground. We have those things, I insisted, more than you could possibly know without meeting him. And does he share your background, your education, your cultural references and experiences? Not all of them, no. That's part of what makes our relationship interesting and growth-producing. He introduces me to new perspectives, and I do the same for him. My father leaned forward, his expression softening into something almost pitying. I'm sure he seems very exotic and exciting compared to the boys you grew up with. But those differences that seem fascinating now become fault lines later. Trust me. Exotic? I repeated incredulously. He's a person, Dad, not a vacation destination. And he's brilliant and kind and hardworking and challenges me to be better every day. All right, he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture that only inflamed me further. I can see you're very invested in this situation. Maybe I should meet this young man before we discuss it further. The condescension in his tone made my blood boil. His name is Elijah, and if you're going to meet him, you need to approach it with an open mind. No preconceived notions based on his race or profession. I don't have preconceived notions, he protested. I'd just like to know who's involved with my daughter. Would you have the same concerns if he were white? If he were, say, a finance bro from Connecticut? My father's jaw tightened. That's not fair, Olivia. I'd question any relationship you kept secret for 8 months. I kept it secret because I knew you'd react exactly like this, I shot back, with thinly veiled prejudice masked as parental concern. That's enough, he snapped, his patience finally fracturing. I've raised you better than to throw around accusations like that. I have black friends, for God's sake. I voted for Obama twice. The predictability of his defense would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. Having black friends doesn't inoculate you against racism, Dad. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to determine who I love based on the color of their skin. This isn't about race, he insisted, though we both knew it was. It's about making sound decisions for your future. Elijah is my future, I said firmly, whether you approve or not. My father stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch before turning back to me, his expression now marble hard. Fine. You want adult honesty? Here it is. I think you're making a mistake. I think you're being naive about the realities of interracial relationships, about the complexities of navigating different worlds. I think you're confusing rebellion with love. It's not rebellion, I whispered, tears threatening despite my determination to remain calm. Then why hide it for 8 months? Why the secrecy and lies, Olivia? Because on some level you know this isn't right. I hid it because I knew you'd be like this. Because I knew you'd try to make me choose between you and him. Something shifted in my father's expression. A hardening. A closing. If that's what you think of me, then maybe you've already made your choice. Don't do this, Dad. Do what? Express concern for my only child's welfare? Try to protect you from making decisions you'll regret? That's my job as your father. Your job is to support me, I countered. To trust that you raised me well enough to make my own choices about who to love. And if I think those choices are wrong, then you keep it to yourself and love me anyway, I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. Because conditional love isn't love at all. It's control. The words hung between us, rain thundering on the porch roof as if underscoring their finality. My father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Well, he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. You've certainly made yourself clear. I love him, Dad, I repeated, desperate now to make him understand. He's not going away, and neither are my feelings. So I need you to try. For me. Please. My father turned away, staring out at the rain-lashed lake. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, almost clinical. If you love him, don't call. 5. Words. An ultimatum disguised as a concession. What? I breathed, certain I'd misheard. You heard me. He didn't turn around. If you're determined to pursue this relationship, then I can't be part of it. I won't stand by and watch you throw away everything we've worked for. Everything we've worked for, I repeated numbly. You mean everything you've planned for me without my input? I've only ever wanted what's best for you. No. You've wanted what's most comfortable for you. What fits your narrative about who I should be. He finally turned back to me, his expression cold in a way I'd never seen before. You're making a choice here, Olivia. I hope you understand what you're sacrificing. I stood, legs shaking but resolve hardening. So are you, Dad, and I hope someday you realize what you're throwing away over nothing but prejudice and control. I walked past him into the house, packed my bag with mechanical efficiency, and was in my car within 15 minutes. He didn't come after me, didn't call my name from the porch, didn't text to make sure I got home safely through the storm. The ultimatum hung between us like a guillotine blade. If you love him, don't call, severing 21 years of connection in a single irreversible stroke. So I didn't call. Not that day. Not the next. Not in the weeks that followed as I moved through my life in a strange fog of grief and liberation. Elijah offered to reach out himself, to try and bridge the gap my father had created. I could talk to him man to man, help him see I'm serious about you, about us. No, I said firmly. This isn't your problem to fix. It's his prejudice, his ultimatum. And honestly, I'm done managing his emotions and prejudices. I've spent my whole life doing that. You sure? Because I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. I took his face in my hands, suddenly clear about what mattered. You're not the reason. His conditional love is the reason. And I'd rather have your authentic love than his approval. Any day. 6 months later, Elijah proposed. Not in some elaborate public spectacle as his celebrity status might have suggested, but quietly, on the rooftop of his Chicago apartment building where we'd first said, I love you, with the city lights spread below us like earthbound stars. I want forever with you, he said simply, holding out a ring that was elegant rather than ostentatious, because he knew me well enough to understand I'd want something I could wear every day, not just for photo ops. Whatever that looks like. However complicated it gets. I said yes without hesitation. The decision as easy as breathing. In that moment, my father's absence felt like a distant bruise, still tender when pressed, but no longer the acute pain it had once been. We set a date for the following spring, giving us time to plan a wedding that would blend our worlds rather than trying to fit either of us into the other's. Vanessa threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm that more than compensated for my father's absence, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. "He'll come around," she predicted one afternoon as we compared table linens. "Once he realizes this is happening with or without his blessing." "I don't think so," I said, surprised by how little the admission hurt. He made his choice pretty clear. "Parents say foolish things when they're scared," she countered. "Trust me, I know." "Even if that's true, I'm not reaching out," I said firmly. The ultimatum was his, not mine. Vanessa studied me with the penetrating gaze that always made me feel transparent. "Sometimes you have to be the bigger person, even when you shouldn't have to be." "Would you have reached out if someone had rejected Elijah for who he is?" Her expression softened. "That's different. Is it?" I challenged gently. She sighed, conceding the point. "No, I suppose it isn't. But for your peace, not his. Sometimes closure matters." I considered her words carefully. "Maybe. But right now, I'm focusing on building something new, not repairing something broken, especially when I'm not the one who broke it." As the wedding approached, I threw myself into creating the day Elijah and I wanted. Meaningful rather than showy, intimate, despite his celebrity status, reflective of both our backgrounds rather than erasing either. I'd always imagined my father walking me down the aisle, but as the RSVP deadline passed with no word from him, I asked my stepfather, my mother's second husband, who had remained a supportive presence in my life despite having no obligation, to do so. "I'd be honored," Frank said when I called him. "Though I'm sorry your dad's being so stubborn about this." "Me too," I admitted. "But it's his loss. Have you tried—" "I'm not calling him," I interrupted, anticipating the suggestion. He made his position clear. "All right," Frank said, not pushing further. "Then we'll make sure it's a beautiful day regardless." 2 weeks before the wedding, a card arrived at our apartment. My father's handwriting on the envelope made my heart race despite my best intentions. Inside was a check, the exact amount we'd estimated for the entire wedding, and a brief note. "Olivia, I can't support this choice, but I won't leave you financially strapped because of principle. Consider this my contribution to your future, whatever form it takes. Dad, no congratulations. No acknowledgement of Elijah as my future husband. Just money. The same solution he'd always applied to emotional problems he couldn't solve otherwise." I ripped the check into tiny pieces before Elijah got home, flushing the evidence down the toilet. If my father thought he could buy his way into influencing our life while maintaining his disapproval, he was sorely mistaken. We'd budgeted carefully, taken only the support freely and lovingly offered by Elijah's family and my mother's relatives. We didn't need his guilt money. I didn't mention the card to anyone, not even Elijah. It wasn't worth disrupting the joy of our approaching wedding with my father's half-hearted gesture. The day itself dawned clear and perfect, one of those miraculous spring Chicago days when the air feels newly made. Lake breezes carrying away the last remnants of winter. We'd chosen a renovated industrial space with exposed brick and huge windows overlooking the city, filled it with simple arrangements of white flowers and greenery, kept the guest list to people who genuinely cared about both of us rather than industry connections or social obligations. I didn't look for my father during the ceremony, didn't scan the crowd for his familiar profile, didn't leave an empty seat in silent invitation. Frank walked me down the aisle with steady pride. Vanessa stood in the front row where mothers traditionally watch their children marry, and Elijah's eyes filled with tears when he saw me approaching in the dress I'd chosen for its simplicity rather than showiness. "You're everything," he whispered when I reached him, audible only to me and our officiant. The vows we'd written ourselves contained no promises to obey, no outdated concepts of possession or hierarchy, only honest commitments to support each other's dreams, to communicate through difficulties, to choose each other deliberately each day, rather than relying on the initial flush of feeling to sustain us. "I choose you," I said, voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. "Not because you're perfect or because we're perfect together, but because you make me want to be my most authentic self, because you've never asked me to be smaller or different or less to accommodate your comfort. And I promise to offer you that same freedom for as long as we both shall live." Elijah's hands tightened around mine. "I choose you despite the obstacles, and because of the strength you've shown in facing them. I promise to be your partner in all things, to hear you, to see you, to champion your dreams as fiercely as my own. To build a life where neither of us has to diminish ourselves to fit, where we can both become more than we ever imagined possible." When the officiant declared us married, the kiss we shared felt like sealing a contract far more binding than any legal document, a promise between equals to create something beautiful from the raw materials of our separate lives. The reception blurred into a kaleidoscope of moments. Elijah's impromptu performance of a song he'd written for me, my stepfather's unexpectedly moving toast, dancing with Vanessa while she whispered advice about partnership that made me blush, college friends mingling seamlessly with Elijah's industry connections. I didn't drink much, just enough champagne to maintain the pleasant buzz of happiness, without dulling the edges of memories I wanted to preserve with perfect clarity. So I was fully present, fully aware when I finally retreated to our hotel suite and sat cross-legged on the bed, still in my reception dress, while Elijah showered off the evidence of hours on the dance floor. The decision to delete my father's contact wasn't dramatic or even particularly emotional. It was simply the final acknowledgement of a truth I'd been living for months. Some distances can't be bridged from only one side. Some relationships survive only through mutual effort. Some losses, while painful, are necessary for growth. 3 seconds of holding down his contact entry, one confident tap on delete contact, and 15 years of desperately seeking approval vanished from my phone, if not my psyche. The easiest hard thing I've ever done. When Elijah emerged from the bathroom, steam following him like a personal weather system, I held up my phone with its newly abbreviated contact list and said, "I just deleted my father." He paused, towel around his waist, another rubbing his hair that somehow always looked perfect, whether professionally styled for magazine covers or dripping onto hotel carpet. "You sure about that?" he asked, not challenging but confirming the distinction that had first made me fall for him. "Absolutely," I replied. He made his choice. I've made mine. 5 years have passed since that night in the hotel room. 5 years of building a life unconstrained by the expectations that had previously defined me. Elijah's career continued its ascent, though he eventually transitioned from performing to producing, preferring the creative control and reduced public scrutiny. My journalism degree led not to the traditional media career my father had envisioned, but to creating a successful podcast exploring the intersection of art, culture, and social justice. We bought a house in a neighborhood halfway between the suburbs where I'd grown up and the south side where Elijah had, a symbolic as well as practical middle ground. When our son was born 2 years ago, we named him Marcus, after Elijah's grandfather, who had raised him during his father's incarceration. Vanessa became a doting grandmother, who spoiled him shamelessly, while teaching him both the resilience that had defined her life and the expansive worldview that had allowed her to embrace me without reservation. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about my father. There were moments. When Marcus took his first steps, when I published my first book, when I glimpsed that airport stranger who might have been him, when the absence still ached like a phantom limb. But the pain was different now. A clean wound, healed but marked by a scar, rather than the festering cut of active rejection. Over the years, there were tentative outreaches from his side, birthday cards with no return address, Christmas gifts, for Marcus sent through my old college friend who still lived in Naperville, even an awkward condolence note when Frank died unexpectedly of a heart attack last year. I acknowledged none of them, not out of spite or ongoing anger, but because half measures and conditions had never been what I was seeking. It wasn't until Marcus's second birthday party, a chaotic, joyful gathering in our backyard with children from both sides of our families, running through sprinklers while adults chatted over barbecue, that the final chapter of the story began to write itself. Elijah nudged me as I was arranging cupcakes on a tiered stand. "Don't look now, but there's someone at the gate." I glanced up instinctively, freezing when I saw the figure standing uncertainly at our garden entrance. My father, visibly older, holding a wrapped gift and looking completely out of place. "Did you invite him?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No," Elijah said firmly. "I wouldn't do that without discussing it with you first." I nodded, grateful for the millionth time for a partner who understood boundaries. "Vanessa, maybe?" "Possibly. She's been saying life's too short since Frank passed." I stood paralyzed, torn between old hurt and new curiosity. 5 years was a long time. People changed. I certainly had. But was it enough? "What do you want to do?" Elijah asked, his hand warm and steady on my lower back. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I studied my father's posture, the uncertainty so foreign to the confident man I'd grown up with. The gift clutched like a shield against potential rejection. Around us, our carefully built life continued its beautiful chaos. Marcus squealing as he ran from his cousins, Vanessa laughing with my college roommate, Elijah's producer friends arguing good-naturedly about a sample clearance issue. This was what I'd chosen. This rich, messy, authentic life, full of love without conditions or expectations. Did I want to risk the peace we'd built by reopening old wounds? Was I strong enough now to engage without being diminished? The answer came with surprising clarity. Yes. Because I was no longer the daughter seeking approval, but the woman, the wife, the mother, the creator, secure enough in my choices to extend grace without surrendering boundaries. "I'll talk to him," I said. "But not about the past. Only about what might be possible going forward." Elijah squeezed my hand. "Want me to come with you?" "No," I decided. "This is something I need to do myself." I crossed the yard slowly, giving my father plenty of time to see me approaching. His expression shifted from anxiety to hope to something like awe as I drew closer. "Olivia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. You're beautiful." Once, those words would have meant everything, the validation I'd spent my childhood seeking. Now they were simply an observation, carrying no more weight than a comment on the weather. "Hello, Dad," I said, stopping on my side of the gate. Not inviting him in, but not turning him away either. A neutral middle ground where we could both decide what came next. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said, gesturing vaguely with the wrapped package. Vanessa sent me the invitation, said it was time to stop being stubborn." I made a mental note to have a serious conversation with my mother-in-law about boundaries, even as I recognized the love behind her interference. "That was her decision, not mine," I said honestly. "But since you're here..." "Why are you here, Dad?" "Really?" He looked down at the gift in his hands, then back at me with eyes that had aged decades in 5 years. "Because I was wrong. About everything. About Elijah. About what was best for you. About what love should look like." He swallowed hard. "And because I miss my daughter. Every day, the words hung between us, weighted with all they didn't say. About prejudice recognized, about control relinquished, about regret accumulated over years of absence. I can't just pick up where we left off," I said carefully. "Too much has happened. I've built a life, a family, without you in it." "I know." He nodded, pain flickering across his features. "I don't expect... I'm not asking for everything back. Just maybe a chance to know my grandson. to show you I've changed, to be part of your life on your terms, not mine. 5 years ago, I might have crumbled at this concession, might have rushed to smooth things over and return to the comfortable fantasy of perfect family. But the woman who had deleted his contact that wedding night knew better than to mistake words for transformation. That would take time, I said. And proof. Not just today, but consistent effort to understand and respect the choices I've made. The person I am now, not the daughter you wanted me to be. I understand, he said. And for the first time, I believed he might actually mean it. I'm willing to put in that work, Olivia, if you'll allow it. I considered him for a long moment. This man who had both shaped and wounded me, whose approval I had simultaneously craved and rejected. The father whose ultimatum had forced me to choose love over comfort, authenticity over acceptance. Marcus is about to blow out his candles, I said finally. If you want to stay for that, you can. Just today. No promises beyond that. Relief flooded his expression. I'd like that. Very much. I opened the gate, not embracing him, but stepping aside to allow him entry into the world I'd created. A conditional welcome that set clear boundaries around what was possible. Thank you, he said quietly as he passed through. I'm not doing it for you, I replied, my voice gentle but firm. I'm doing it because I'm secure enough now to make this choice from strength, not need. Because the life I've built is strong enough to withstand testing. Because I want Marcus to understand that people can change, that forgiveness is possible without forgetting. My father nodded, accepting these terms without argument, perhaps the clearest sign that something had truly shifted in him. As we walked toward the birthday gathering, Elijah looked up from where he was helping Marcus onto a chair before the cake. Our eyes met across the yard, and I gave him a small nod. I'm okay. This is my choice. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of trust and support. Whether this tentative reconnection would grow into something meaningful or wither under the weight of history remained to be seen, but for the first time since that rainy day at the lake house, the choice felt truly mine. Not driven by fear or obligation or the desperate need for validation, but by the confident woman I had become precisely because I had chosen love over approval. Sometimes deleting a contact is more than removing a number. Sometimes it's making space for a different kind of connection, one based on mutual respect rather than uneven power. One where love doesn't require diminishment, where differences strengthen rather than threaten, where coming together is a choice rather than an obligation. I deleted my father's number on my wedding day, a small act of liberation that had helped me become the woman now strong enough to potentially let him back in, not as the all-powerful parent whose approval I craved, but as a flawed human being seeking connection on more equal terms. As I watched him tentatively approach my husband and son, the family I had chosen and created despite his resistance, I realized that true freedom comes not from severing ties, but from transforming them, from standing firmly in your own worth, drawing clear boundaries, and deciding for yourself what kind of love deserves space in your life. I had chosen love over approval 5 years ago. Now, stronger and more secure, I was choosing to see if those two things might finally be reconciled. Not because I needed them to be, but because I was finally certain I could live without either if necessary. That certainty, that bone-deep knowledge of my own worth independent of his validation. That was the real wedding gift I had given myself when I deleted his contact. Not a dramatic gesture of severance, but a quiet declaration of self-sufficiency that had paradoxically created the only foundation from which reconciliation might actually be possible. Whatever happened next would be on my terms. Authentic, honest, measured not by his expectations but by the values I had deliberately chosen to center my life around. Love, truth, growth, family, both born and chosen. Worth fighting for. Worth walking away from conditional versions of. And maybe, just maybe, worth rebuilding when the conditions finally fall away.